Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Uh, Ambassador Smith, I was curious too, and I think this is worth mentioning. The U.S. commitment to Ukraine uh, just isn't one with NATO. Uh, as we're dealing with continued nuclear threats, particularly in Iran, we know the danger of those threats. Well, decades ago, there was a commitment made to Ukraine. Can you talk about the U.S. commitment to Ukraine before and why that commitment was so important?
So there have been multiple, thank you, Ranking Member Keating. There have been multiple commitments to Ukraine over the years. First and foremost, the NATO alliance promised in 2008 that Ukraine would become a member of the alliance. But Ukraine has also gone through its own process of ridding itself of any sort of nuclear weapons program with the hope that the United States and other countries would come to its aid.
How big an arsenal was that? I mean, there was the U.S., there was Russia. Where was Ukraine back then?
It was significant,
Was it
not
the
on
third,
the scale of Russia, but this was an arsenal that would have, had it remained, served as a very effective deterrent to Russia's aggression that we
So the
saw
U.S.
unfold
commitment
in
was
February.
before even
Indeed.
this.
Well
and that
before.
commitment
Well
said
before.
that the U.S. would defend aggression against Ukraine.
Indeed.
And so here we are. And now we have NATO allies joining us. I'm curious, how many times has Article 5 been implemented by NATO?
Only once, sir, and that was, of course, after 9/11
So,
here in the United States, when
so who
European
benefited
allies
from that?
came
We all
to
benefited, but indeed, I was in Afghanistan and Iraq. I saw NATO soldiers. I saw them there defending, and many times unpopular in their own countries, the U.S. defense in that regard. I'm curious, too, if Putin is successful in Ukraine, Admiral, what would that mean for U.S. investment? You know, we're talking a lot about money here. What about the cost of Putin being successful in Ukraine? What would NATO, what would the United States, do you believe, have to deploy in Eastern Europe? And how expensive would that be?
Well, if he's successful in Ukraine, and I don't think he will be, but if he was successful in Ukraine, it would put tremendous pressure on the Baltic states and Poland. The Souvlaki Gap, the area that he would like to grab there, is very easy. So for us to counter that, it would take, we already have a brigade in Poland. It would take a division in Poland. We have battalions in the Baltic states. It would take brigades in the Baltic states. In other words, at a time when we are considering reducing our footprint in Europe, we would actually have to significantly increase at least those rotational forces.
And wouldn't you say, in your experience, deployment of troops is far more expensive than assets?
It is, yes, sir. It would be a lot more expensive than the 32 or 34 billion dollars worth of weaponry.
And we talked too about the need for our own country to do better in terms of procurement and dealing with our assets. But wasn't, in fact, we were in a period of modernization in our own country. I'm on armed services as well. And so we were modernizing our forces. And many of these outdated, by our perspective, assets were so useful to Ukraine. And wasn't, Ambassador Smith, wasn't the investment of U.S. dollars, most of that money stayed here? Is that true? Most of it stayed here in jobs and to modernize our own. So we benefited by this investment, not just Ukraine.
Absolutely. In many cases, Europeans have been purchasing equipment in the United States from our defense industrial base to send to Ukraine, as well as they've purchased equipment for their own use after they've donated more dated equipment to Ukraine. So these contributions have come back to the United States, and America's own commitments, the money that's been dedicated to Ukraine, has gone into building out our own capabilities as we've donated others.
And how important, from a diplomatic standpoint, is it to be consistent? You know, I listen, as many people do, to the comments of Viktor Orban in Hungary and the things he's saying. How discordant is the comments by someone like Viktor Orban in Hungary in our effort?
Well, it is disturbing to hear comments from our friends in Hungary that they have very mixed views on supporting Ukraine. They have found some smaller ways to support Ukraine, but this has been a challenge across the alliance to maintain that unity. But the key to it has been U.S. leadership.
Well,
and when the U.S.
quickly,
leads,
I've got 6
it brings
seconds left.
the allies together.
Would you say a savior of NATO would say you're on your own, or go it alone? Does that make sense?
No, no.
Donald Trump said those. I yield back.
Thank